Hello and welcome to the lecture for chapter 7.1 to 7.8. This deals with organizational structures, so how companies and not-for-profits and government agencies arrange their employees in terms of who works for who is at what level, all of that. So we'll kind of describe how organizations think about those kinds of things and how they communicate that to their employees. All of you are going to work in an organization one day. You're all going to be somewhere on an organizational chart. So it's important to kind of understand how those work. So here's one example of the upper ranks of an organization. And you can see it's in kind of a hierarchical fashion. So the chief executive officer, sometimes that's shortened to CEO or the president of the company. That person is at the top in how it's done traditionally. And then beneath that, we have vice presidents. That is an example of functional departmentalization. So each vice president is in charge of a different portion of the organization, and they report directly to the chief executive officer. And then an example beneath the vice president of marketing, sometimes you'll have geographical departmentalization. So you may have somebody in charge, in this example, domestic versus international. I've worked in companies that had an East Coast sales manager and a Western sales manager that looked after different parts of the country. So that's very common as well. And then below the domestic sales manager, you can see in this example, there's a sales manager for business markets and a sales manager for consumer markets. So sometimes you'll departmentalize based on the type of customer that's being served, because different types of customer groups require a different approach or a different assortment of products, or whatever the case is. So these are different examples, and companies can choose to do it all based on functional departmentalization. Sometimes that is the method they use throughout the organization to organize. They could use geographical, or they could use customer. And in some cases, they do some of all of them, like in this example here. So an organizational chart, it tells you kind of who works for who and what areas that they're responsible for. One thing to think about are direct and indirect reports. So let's think now about the vice president of marketing. So the vice president of marketing, that blue box in the middle there, that person's direct reports are the domestic and international sales manager. Those are people that report directly to that vice president. The sales manager for business markets and the sales manager for consumer markets, those would be considered indirect reports to the VP of marketing. So they fall under that person's responsibility, but don't report directly to them. They report to somebody who does report to them. That's kind of one way of thinking about the hierarchy. So if you're the sales manager for business markets, the VP of marketing is your boss's boss, is another way of thinking about that. One thing I also want to mention here is this span of control. So this is a fairly small organizational chart. It's just an example, of course, but you can see that the CEO has 3 people working for him or her. VP of marketing has 2 people. Domestic sales manager has 2 people in terms of direct reports. A good rule of thumb is that, and it could vary by organizations, is that the number of direct reports you have, that's also called the span of control, shouldn't really be more than 6 or 7. If you get more than 6 or 7 people reporting directly to you, it can be really hard to pay attention to what those people's needs are, to understand what they're doing, to offer them support when they need it, all of those kinds of things. So that's something to keep in mind. My son was managing a company once, a retail store, and he told me that he was just going crazy because he couldn't keep track of everything. And I asked him how many direct reports he had. At that time, he didn't have an assistant manager, so all the people that would have reported to the assistant manager reported to him, and he had 12 or 13 people reporting to him. So of course he couldn't juggle that many balls at the same time. So that can be something to watch out for. The other thing I want to mention are line and staff functions. So a line function means you're involved in the effort of that organization to do what they exist to do. create products or deliver services to customers. If you work at H&R Block, if you're a line function, you're doing tax returns. If you work at St. Martin's University, a line function would be you're a professor teaching students. If you work at Tesla, you're somebody that's actually building cars. A staff function is all of the functions that exist to support the line function. So if you work at Tesla and you're in the payroll office and you're processing people's pay, you're there to support the line function. If you're an engineer at Tesla that is keeping the production line running and helping program robots or that sort of thing, you're a staff function because you're supporting the actual production process. So some organizations have gone to a different kind of model that's called a matrix organization. That's where everybody in the company has two bosses, two or more bosses. So as an example there, you can see there are different project managers down the left side for A, B, and C. Those might be project managers for different types of products or different regions of the country, that sort of thing. And then each of them have a research and development employee, a quality control employee, a purchasing agent, and a manufacturing employee. So those people report to their local boss, the project manager A. That's the person like, here, you coming to work on time, you get along with other people, you're doing your job correctly, that sort of thing. But each of those people also report to somebody that is kind of a subject matter expert in their field. So there is somebody in charge of all research and development for the whole company, and each of the research and development people under each project also report to them. I've worked in a company like this before where I was a vice president. I worked for a local president in the country that we were in, but I also reported to the head of production and the head of finance at the overall company. So those two people made sure that I was doing my job correctly, and the local president made sure that I was, behaving properly and being a good employee. So I think I've shown you this earlier in the year, but this is an example of the organizational chart at my company right before I sold it. In fact, I think I prepared this organizational chart for the new owner of the company so that they could see who worked for who. So again, I just show this as an example about the span of control. You can see I had, I had 8 people working for me. That's a little bit big in terms of broadness of span of control. Most people had fewer people than that working for them. But in this example here, based on what I've said already, you can probably see that the company was organized based on functions. So we had sales and marketing, product support, which is another word for customer service, engineering, and then all of the production related fields. So purchasing, shipping, fabrication, which is production and then fabrication. Again, this helped people see, okay, I know who my boss is. If I'm Mike Pepion and I need help from Chris Smith, I know who I should go and ask. Can Chris help me? That sort of thing. So a little bit about teams, because really any organization, any subunit within an organization is effectively a team. And what you strive for is that the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. That's another term for synergy. And any of you that have played on a sports team have probably experienced that, where when everything is really clicking, when everybody is really playing complementary roles and supporting each other, it can be magical. Everybody kind of rises to a new level, and as a group you accomplish things that you couldn't have accomplished individually. It's a wonderful thing when that happens. I have pictures there of a couple of good teams. The Seahawks that made the Super Bowl run won there, and then of course hopefully you all recognize the 4 Beatles on the other side. So those are examples of groups where together they accomplish something much beyond what any of them could have done individually. So in this case, a team is, stay here, a group of people with certain skills who are committed to a common purpose, approach, and a set of performance goals. What do they want to achieve together? And again, if they're pulling in the same direction, that is wonderful. I often ask students, how much they like group projects in classes. And universally, students don't like them at all. And the reason for that is they feel like, oh, one person doesn't do enough work, and so then I have to do extra work to make up for them, and there's disagreements about the direction they should take. Students generally dislike group projects. And so you might ask, well, why do teachers assign group projects? Well, they assign group projects because when you walk across the stage and get your degree and you leave and go get your first professional job, guess what? You'll be doing group projects all the time. You'll be working with a production manager and a marketing manager and a customer service manager to launch a new product and provide customers and salespeople with everything they need, marketing messages, all of that. That's a group project, right? You don't do any of those things on your own. So knowing how to work within a team effectively is really, really important. So there are different types of teams, and I've got I'll give a brief overview here. So starting with the pink pie shape there, problem-solving teams. That's when there's a problem, a machinery breaks, we have a recall on a product, a competitor launched something that's going to beat our product, whatever the case is, but there's a problem that needs to be solved. You bring the people together that need to do it, and you do it, and then the team is disbanded. Going clockwise, self-managed teams, there are some companies that believe that it can be an effective approach to not have bosses. Whole Foods is an example of that. So Whole Foods will create teams in different parts of the store. There'll be a produce team, a bakery team, a pre-prepared food team, that sort of thing. And those groups meet together, talk about what their objectives are, what's working, what isn't working, and they decide what they should do to make things better. And they don't have a boss. And a lot of people like working in those conditions, and some people don't. Cross-functional teams, like I mentioned earlier about launching a product and you need people from different parts of the company to all kind of play a role. That's an example of a cross-functional team. Those would be different than a problem-solving team in that they would continue on. They wouldn't last for just one problem. Virtual teams are, of course, we see a lot of that now, being on Zoom and working with each other in different parts of the world potentially. So you're using technology, you're using things like Slack to communicate with each other, you're using joint spreadsheets, things like that to track things. So that's a virtual team. And then a work team is people that just do the daily work. They get together, make out a plan for the day, and they do have a boss, and that boss leads them in what they do. So a little bit about effective teams. So team cohesiveness, that's the extent that people are committed to the team, that they want to be there, they're attracted to the mission of the team, they are on board, in effect. So to the extent that teams have that kind of cohesiveness, that they tend to work well together and all pull in the same direction, people find that to be a better experience. They tend to be more motivated. The team is usually more effective. Sometimes companies will send a team out on like a ropes course or go zip lining or do I used to take teams of people on river rafting trips, things like that, where you get them out of their normal environment. You engage them in an activity where they have to work together and rely on each other, and it can change the character of their relationships with each other in a positive way. So when you go work somewhere and they say, oh, we're going to go do this or that, it's not just a fun vacation day, it's actually for a purpose. So a team norm is the standard of conduct that the team agrees to abide by. One really good example of that is communication. So a good thing to talk about with a team is, hey, when we just want to let everybody know something, we'll use an email. You don't have to reply. If something is really urgent, I'm going to text your cell phone, and let's all agree that during normal working hours, we respond to a text within an hour. We don't leave it for the next day. that would be an example of an agreed upon team norm. This is how we're going to be with each other. This is how we're going to work together. And getting everybody to buy into that and agree to that, and then of course kind of live by that. So team conflict occurs when the needs of one or more members don't match those of another, right? When people have different perspectives or different goals, and those kind of butt up against each other. I have found in the past that the more that team members care about the outcome, oftentimes the more likely it is that there is conflict. If people don't care about the outcome, if they don't care about the team reaching the goal, they're not going to care enough to argue with other people. So if they care about it, that's when they're going to kind of defend their position and go for it. So it's important to recognize that conflict isn't universally bad. I, for a long time in my career, tried to avoid conflict wherever I could. And I finally recognized that sometimes it could be productive. Sometimes it can tear a team apart. You guys have all probably experienced that. But sometimes it can lead to good outcomes. It can lead to, hey, you're not right and I'm not right, but there's a third way that is the right way, that sort of thing. So the more diverse your team is, the also more likely it is that you're going to have disagreements and different perspectives. But again, that's a healthy thing. The key thing about resolving conflict is to clearly state what the source of the conflict is and to keep it objective and not let it get personal. So cognitive conflict is when you focus on the problem-related differences of opinion, okay, and you reconcile those. Affective conflict is more emotional, and that's when people start insulting each other or questioning each other's motivation or that sort of thing. And that can generally be destructive. That can harm a team, and sometimes to the extent that it's not possible to kind of come back from that. So whenever you are managing a situation or managing a team where there is that kind of conflict, and it could be a group project in a class that you're managing, it's important to keep the focus on the problem, not on the individuals. So being a good team leader means that you can kind of facilitate that so that we can have productive disagreements and reach a good spot. So thank you very much for your time. In our next class, we will talk about the upcoming paper that's due. Thank you very much.